Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Beauty History. I am your host, Allison Chase. Beauty History is where we take a deep dive into the life, the legacy of a fashion or beauty icon. And today, we will be talking about a female fashion dynasty, Fendi. But before we go any further, let's take a second to grab our iced coffee or hot coffee. Let's take a sip and let's get started. Join me the first Friday of every month. This is where I upload a new episode of Beauty History. Once a month is all I can manage. And before we take a deep dive into the female fashion dynasty of Fendi, I want to give a quick shout out to a few special audience members who used the thanks button last month. A special thank you goes out to Elena Polshakov, Christina O'Connell, and Mary Walquist. For those of you interested, I did come out with my very own Beauty History bingo card that I published last month. So if you want to go ahead and play that today and see how many we get today, I'm not sure. So that's just like a fun little tidbit you can do. You can actually use that bingo card and go back and watch some episodes. I think some of them, like Gucci, Guerlain, you might get the full card. I'm not sure. Coco Chanel certainly will have some interesting cards too. But I digress. Back to Fendi. Let's start from the very beginning, from the top. This starts with our matriarch, Adele Casagrande. She was born in Italy in 1897. Now, I have found different sources. Some sources state that Adele, on her own, opened up her first shop as early as 1918. And this was prior to her marriage. And so the shop was in her name, Adele Casagrande. And then at some point she got married and then renamed the shop. She got married to Edoardo Fendi, and they opened their shop, the Fendi shop, in 1925. The overlapping information states that the Fendi boutique was opened in 1925. So whether Adele started before her husband or she started when she married him, that is unclear. And this shop was located on Via del Plebiscito in Rome, Italy. This is a Roman family. This shop was in Rome, and they actually built several, which we will go ahead and talk about later. And this was a small leather goods store, and also, like, they did handbags and purses, but one thing they did from the beginning was furs. Now, when it comes to furs, like real furs, this is a long history with Fendi. It's, I would say, as long as it is polemical, furs have been a part of Fendi identity. The workshop that Adele and Edoardo ran also worked as a home away from home for their 5 children. They had 5 daughters. They had Carla, Paola, Anna, Franca, and Alda. I'm surprised I remembered all those. But yeah, they had 5 daughters, and from a very young age, the daughters basically lived at the workshop. They would nap in the giant drawers for handbags. Sometimes they would tie like a magnet around a ribbon and drag it across the workshop floor to collect pins that had fallen off of furs, for when they were being designed. So basically they lived and played in the workshop between their parents' legs as their parents were trying to fulfill orders for their clients. Now, in 1932, the parents, Adele and Edoardo, opened up a second location. This was on Via Piave, which was still in Rome, and this was a very, very popular destination, especially for tourists, and this was great for them. People would come into Rome and they wanted to get, the latest and greatest in Italian leather, Italian fashion, Italian designs. Like, the idea of something made in Italy still holds a lot of sway. It still signifies great craftsmanship, just great quality. And so here they were able to make a lot of profit and just keep growing their business. The power couple would go on to open 4 more boutiques in Rome, and over 2 decades they opened several boutiques, and they just really grew their business. They did really well for themselves, you know, a lot better than most of us who open up a small business. They did really great, but at the same time, it really would be their daughters that would propel them to Fendi status, because even though the parents were successful and knew what they were doing, it still didn't become Fendi until the daughters took over. But it wouldn't be until the late 50s and 60s that the second generation would come in, because they were still children. So as the daughters grew up, they grew up at the workshop, basically, you know, playing with scraps and napping and lounging in piles of furs, you know, very normal. But they also learned the trade. Even though they were daughters, the business would go on to them, not their husbands. Hallelujah. So at a young age, depending on their age, obviously Carla was the oldest, I believe, or is it Paola? Hold on. Carla was the oldest. So basically, as you grew up, as you got older, you would join the ranks. Like at first, all you did was spend your days behind the scenes at the workshop just playing around, and then as you got older you would get little tasks. You would have to learn the trade, not only like the manual labor of the craftsmanship, like the craft itself, but the business, the marketing, the bookkeeping, you know, like all that stuff. So regardless of whether or not these girls had a passion for fur coats and leather handbags, they were sort of fated into joining the Fendi female dynasty. When the daughters would be older, they would each branch off into a different sector of the company, but at the beginning it was just fill whatever need is required on the floor right now. And Anna Fendi, one of the daughters, who was often considered to be the most creative, said about their mother, Adele, she would always tell their daughters that they needed to be always as the fingers of one hand, different but absolutely complementary. So I think, like I stated, they didn't really have an option of whether or not they wanted to join the dynasty. You were falling in line as a Fendi. Anna, like I stated, was the most creative one. And she initially, in her youth, wanted to be a dancer. She was a classically trained dancer. And so I think she had ideas that she was going to maybe be a ballerina. But life had different plans in store for her. And I think she knew from a young age that as much as she loved arts and dance and classical things like that, her life would be Fendi. I think it's really interesting, this motto that Adele instilled in her daughters, that no matter what they did, no matter what their interests were, that they all had to work together. Maybe that was like some sort of parenting tactic to be like, listen, there's 5 of you in this house, you're all fighting. You gotta make it work. You gotta get along. You gotta just find some peace and balance and just work together. Maybe that was her parenting strategy. But Adele also had very interesting ideas about the children's fashions. Like Adele was very much into fashion, into looking chic and presentable, and she always insisted on making sure her daughters looked the very best. And this would also mean, like often it would mean that she would dress them in black or navy. And so even if the family was on a beach vacation, she was like, you are dressing properly. You are going to be wearing head to toe black or navy at the beach. So it would only be in the 40s and 50s that the daughters would all join the ranks. And this is when Fendi really evolved into what we think of Fendi now. Obviously there's more to come, but it's really this point, like this period here, that had the biggest impact and change on Fendi. And Anna, again, stated that initially each of us used to make herself useful wherever she was needed, but afterwards each of us started to take over different tasks as the result of following our own personal inclination. Since my first work experience, my vocation has been that of creative person within the company, But when it came to the actual collections, we were all united. Like 5 fingers in a hand, each of us different, but each of us complemented the others, which makes sense. They all sort of fell in line into different categories of like marketing, research, selling, being creative. At first, they sort of just filled in whatever hole was necessary. But then I think as the years went on, as they each developed personally in their own skills, they kind of saw, you kind of figure out as you get older what you're good at in life and what you're talented at. And so they just needed a little bit of time to figure it out, which is extremely understandable. So as usual, I did my very best to find as much information as I could on Adele and Eduardo, historical facts, anecdotes, etc. But this family is very private. It's not the Gucci's. They definitely have a lot of information that is just kept personal, which makes sense. It's understandable. So I can't exactly fill this in with like what their favorite type of cheese was. But Eduardo did pass away very early, very young. He was in his 50s. He died in 1954, so he died at a very young age. And Adele would continue on living. She passed away in 1978, so she was a young widow. And she, it's very sad when there's like such a gap in age between, well, he died so young. But anyway, Adele continued on the company. She continued with Fendi, and this is when the daughter started to step in, which makes sense. Their father passed away, they were getting older, and so they joined the Fendi ranks. Now let's take a deep dive into the 5 sisters. As a refresher, we have Carla, Paola, Anna, Franca, and Alda. So again, I did my very best to find information on each sister because I wanted to give each sister the time and respect here on today's episode. But some of the sisters are much more high profile than others, and some of the sisters are so low profile I could not find a peep. So I did my best here. The first sister we're going to talk about is the eldest, Carla. She was affectionately nicknamed the General. She was the one who had like the business mind. She was the one who took charge. She was really the one that helped propel the business in the business aspect. Like she really took the reins of the marketing, the business aspect of the meetings. Like she was the general. That was her job. Carla really masterminded a lot of the commercial success behind the brand, and especially once she took over. She also was nicknamed the Queen of Fur, the Brain, and she was also called a piece of Italian fashion history. That's a pretty cool title to have, like when you're still around, to be called like a piece of Italian fashion history. It's a pretty great title. Carla seemed to have this like natural inclination for all things business, and she was the driving force. She was really the strong mind, and she was instrumental in elevating Fendi into a luxury goods brand. She was also instrumental in expanding the brand internationally, globally. She was the one who extended the brand to the US market, which is a really big deal. She achieved this in 1969, so not that long after she, officially joined Fendi as a full-time job. In 1969, she was able to bring Fendi to New York at the Henry Bendel department store. I think this department store is now closed, but it used to be like a Nordstrom's, a Saks type of department store. And this really just was an incredibly lucrative chapter in Fendi history. I mean, bringing it to the US market and just having this like made in Italy, Italian craft, leather and fur, but in New York, in Manhattan, was huge. It was a big success. Carla did get married, but she never had children. And between the 5 Fendi sisters, they had 11 children and 30 grandchildren. I'm not sure how many great-grandchildren they've had, but that's just a lot. Like, isn't it crazy that Adele and Eduardo, the family tree is just so huge. So Carla never had kids. She really just focused on her partnership and also on her career, you know, bringing Fendi worldwide and just expanding it globally. Karla Fendi remained president of Fendi up until 2008, even though LVMH bought out Fendi in 2001. Of course they did. LVMH buys out everyone. And so even though Fendi was purchased by LVMH, Carla stayed on as president until 2008, and she remained as honorary president up until her death in 2017. Sadly, she passed away in 2017 at the age of 79. And I think the older I get, the younger I think people are when they pass away. I think anything under the age of 85 now is young and tragic, but that could just be my age speaking for me. And Carla was a huge patron of the arts. She loved the arts, she loved Italy, and that's something that I've noticed with Fendi, with the Fendi sisters. They have this appreciation for Italian craftsmanship, Italian arts, and Carla had her Carla Fendi Foundation, and she's actually credited as being one of the major patrons and donors into the restoration of the Trevi Fountain. When she passed away, she was honored by the Italian Ministry of Culture, so she had a huge impact not only in her own industry, but also in the arts world. And that's actually something that we can see later with the rest of the sisters. They definitely have this deep appreciation for the arts, for culture, for history. I just appreciate that. Now, Paola Fendi was known for her work with furs. She worked a lot with furs. She's a Fendi after all. She basically was an expert in furs, or still is, and she specialized in the manufacturing, tanning, and also dyeing of Fendi furs. Listen, as far as Fendi goes, Fendi and fur, it's kind of one and the same. Fortunately, unfortunately, I don't know, you be the judge. Franca, the other sister, was a buyer, and she also worked in customer relations. She worked as a manager. Alda directed sales and also worked in the fur atelier with her sister Paola. So around this time, this was like in the 60s, like early 60s, mid 60s, Fendi was really looking to modernize, to innovate, to push. You know, they had great success, but it was still at the level of their parents' success, and they kind of just wanted their own chapter. They wanted to elevate it. So they had this crazy idea of hiring a freelance artistic director named Karl Lagerfeld. So, fun fact, Karl Lagerfeld would later go on to be affectionately nicknamed the sixth Fendi sibling. It was that successful. So Karl Lagerfeld was this young Paris-based designer. Well, he's German, or was German, but he lived in Paris, obviously. And at the time, it was completely unheard of to hire a freelance artistic director. It just didn't happen. Like, it wasn't a thing. But they said, you know what? We want to give this guy a try. And it was a great idea because Karl Lagerfeld was a genius. There's no one that's been able to even come close to what he's been able to achieve. And the partnership between Fendi and Karl lasted 54 years. Like, that's a long time. He was freelance, but their relationship that they built together was so lucrative, but also just, they all meshed well together. It was just the best vibes, good vibes only. They worked so well, and it was just, I don't know, like the invention of sliced bread. It was such a great idea, such a great relationship, not only business-wise, but also interpersonally. And the relationship that Fendi had with Karl lasted several decades.
Dessiner les 5 sœurs Fendi, c'est compliqué.
Il y avait Alda qui était blonde, qui avait un côté Silvana Mangano presque qui était très différent des autres, qui était la plus jeune. Il y avait la plus brune qui était l'aînée, c'était Paola, comme ça, que j'aimais beaucoup, qui était la grande spécialiste de la fourrure. Ça c'est Alda. Et Carla, elle était un peu, comment dirais-je, le moteur de tout ça, parce qu'elle avait une espèce de don de Pia avant les autres, quand elle avait les cheveux très courts comme ça, Carla. Et puis Franca était blonde, mais elle était plus effacée et elle était moins dans le cou. Elle s'occupait plus des accessoires et des choses comme ça. Elle était plus effacée. Et puis il y a Anna qui était tout bouclée avec un petit nez retroussé, comme ça.
Karl worked closely with the sisters because all 5 of them were involved every day at the workshop in the head office. So, they weren't just heiresses to Fendi. They actually worked and did everything themselves. And so Karl worked with each of them in their own little categories to just develop this relationship. And his task was to modernize Fendi furs because at the time, a lot of furs were just really heavy and maybe even a tad dowdy. Like if you think of a fur coat, sometimes it kind of looks like a square, just kind of boxy and just not very chic, not the vision that Adele had for, chic, sleek furs. And so his job was to modernize furs, elevate them, make them more luxury, make them lighter, more youthful, just attract a new audience, basically. Needless to say, this collaboration was immensely successful. Karl succeeded at modernizing, just making the furs lighter, and so they didn't feel as heavy. You didn't feel like the fur was wearing you. And he just helped modernize and just focus on making the furs luxury and an iconic, not a statement piece, but like a collector's item that you would want to have in your wardrobe. It's always interesting when I do these fashion beauty history episodes where all of a sudden a company goes from just a small little shop to the brand it is today. Because, what exactly made it so that when we think of Fendi, we all know who Fendi is. We may not own Fendi, but we know what Fendi is. And sometimes it's just a little bit of luck. Someone just comes in, offers some great ideas, and instead of Fendi just being a small little mom and pop shop you see on a street corner somewhere in Rome, it is Fendi in the big flashing lights. If you have not seen my episode on Karl Lagerfeld, which I did a couple of months ago, I did an entire episode dedicated to him. I highly encourage that you do. He was a genius. There's so much to talk about with him. There's so much that he did in the fashion and beauty world that I would really recommend that you watch it. Because, if you're here watching this, I think you would enjoy my episode on Karl Lagerfeld. So I will leave that down below. And something really interesting that Karl did for Fendi and the Fendi sisters is he came out with the Fendi logo. Oftentimes when we think of logos, we think of it as long-standing, the brand opened up and they had their catchy catchphrase and logo right away. That's often not the case. And so with Fendi, it's Karl that invented this inverted F logo you see with Fendi, where they're kind of snuggled together. And you may think this is just a double F for Fendi. No, it stands for Fun Furs. Listen, as far as Fendi goes, furs have been part of their history from the dawn of time. Fendi existed, furs existed with them. And so this is part of Karl's contribution to Fendi, is making furs fun, youthful, light, modernizing them. This is part of Karl's contribution to Fendi. I think he really succeeded in making the brand and their luxury furs more playful, especially with the Fun Fendi. I had no idea what that was. I thought it was just Fendi, double Fendi. No, Fun Furs. Now you know, fun fact. All of this combined helped evolve Fendi into this elite, upper class. It was no longer just stuffy and dowdy furs. It was young, it was modern, it was youthful, it was playful. And when you think of fashion from the 1970s, there's bell bottoms, of course, but there's also furs. When you think of 70s fashion, rock stars with their bell bottoms and platform shoes, they would often have long fur coats. Who do you think they were wearing? Fendi, most likely, or a knockoff or a brand imitating Fendi, because that's what they were known for, their fur coats. So Anna Fendi, the more creative daughter, the less general type, she was the creative spirit, and she worked a lot with handbags, accessories, and she also helped revolutionize the accessory sector, the leather sector. She wanted new materials, new fabrics. She was always pushing the envelope. She didn't want just like a leather bag. She wanted different fabrics, different materials. She wanted something new all the time. She was always creating new concepts, new lines for Fendi. She would deconstruct bags. In the 90s, her and Karl worked in making handbags softer and more comfortable to wear instead of being like a hard, rigid handbag. Just make it more soft and supple, but still very resistant and, you know, like a good bag, but just making it a little bit easier to wear every day. She also pushed to have the showroom, the atelier, the selling area all into one place, which would become the headquarters in Rome. Currently, the headquarters have changed place. Makes sense. This was the 1960s, but she's the one who pushed to have all of this in the same building. And I guess it would just be easier to work. All the sisters could just go into the same workplace on different floors and do their own work. And so she's the one who pushed for the first headquarters like that. So under Anna's creative supervision, Fendi started adding new lines. So they worked on their first casual line, the ready-to-wear line. She also helped launch the menswear line. She also worked on eyewear, jewelry, fragrances, bed linen, etc. Like bed linen, that's the word. She just did a whole lot. As far as accessories go, that was Anna's department. And she does not currently work for Fendi anymore, but she did for a very long time. And she was both the head of production and the head of style departments at the same time, which is very impressive to do all that work at the same time. Anna is known for being the creative force behind Fendi, but she's also known for being an entrepreneur. She actually launched her own wine label named Anna Fendi, of course. And so Anna Fendi wines include red wines, white wines, sparkling wines, rosés, also spirits. And I found her website, and this is what it says regarding fashion, culture, wine, etc. Fashion as wines bases its success on simple fundamentals, passion, and research. When I started my trip along the Italian peninsula, I discovered a world made of genuine and enthusiasm regarding the people. Breathtaking landscapes, exquisite flavors growing up naturally from the earth, all this in my quest of beauty and perfection moved me to create an unconventional wine collection that allows people to share the joy of life and enjoy the excellence of made in Italy. So again, we have this reverence, this respect for everything made in Italy. I haven't tried her wines yet. I personally enjoy a sweet wine. I love sweet wines and dessert wines, so I think she has a couple in her collection, so I'll see if they're available here in Montreal. Now, in 1994, Anna's daughter, Silvia Venturini Fendi, joined Fendi, and she became the third generation of Fendi women to join the ranks. She worked under the late and great Karl Lagerfeld, and she was the head of the accessories, and this is where she really flourished and came out with some truly iconic pieces of fashion history. But before joining the family business, Silvia had worked as the family's global ambassador, going to New York, meeting with buyers in department stores, etc. But she also had a reputation of being Rome's queen of the social scene, in a sense. By her own admission, Silvia said that she played just as hard as she worked, and she said that her and her sister, Maria Teresa, would work like crazy and then go out all night. She said that one time she arrived at a Bergdorf Goodman store, still wearing our evening dresses, high heels, and makeup from the nightclub. Listen, we've all been in our 20s, haven't we? In my youth, in my early 20s, when I was living in France, one time we all went out night clubbing, and I don't know if you're familiar, but in France, nightclubs stay open real late. And we got on the metro in the morning. We staggered and swayed onto the metro, and I looked around me and people were wearing suits and carrying briefcases to go to work. So I won't judge you. In 1997, Silvia and Karl collaborated on a new bag for Fendi, the Baguette. The Fendi Baguette. So this design was inspired by the baguette, the French bread. It was inspired specifically by women, like French women, taking a baguette and just putting it under their arm, very chic, just, you know, running off to do whatever. And so it was designed to be discreet, to be subtle, to be small, to be so chic. And this original design, it's about 20 years, oh my god, it's 20 years old, I feel so old. It had an original design where it had one strap and one flap, but the baguette has been reimagined and reinvented so many times. There's double flaps, double straps, there's different fabrics, there's mixing fabrics, mixing colors, mixing patterns. It's been everywhere. And the Fendi Baguette is actually credited as one of, if not the first, it bag. Now, if you remember Sex and the City, which I hope you do, you will remember that Carrie Bradshaw was once mugged and her Fendi Baguette was stolen. And, well, this is what she said.
Oh, excuse me, sir. I know this sounds ridiculous, but can you tell me which way is West Broadway?
Give me your bag.
What?
Your bag.
It's a baguette.
Let me have it.
I couldn't believe it. 15 years in New York, and just when the city was getting safe, I was getting mugged.
Is this for real?
You're watching your ring. Quick.
Oh, Jesus. I'm sorry.
Come on. And your Manolo Blahniks.
What? No.
Give me your fucking Blahniks.
These guys weren't just after money anymore. They were after fashion.
Please, sir.
It's true. It's not a bag, it's a baguette. It's so much more important. There's more significance here. It's not just a bag, it's a baguette. And so what's actually interesting is I think some of the logo mania from the 90s also helped propel the baguette into its status symbol because it had the double FF, you know, fun furs on the bag. So it just helped with the popularity. And interestingly enough, they did actually retire the bag, but they brought it back in like 2019 because it's been a few years now that the 90s are definitely back. The 90s are back in full swing. And there has been this callback to 90s aesthetic, 90s silhouettes as well. If you think of the Fendi Baguette, the Dior saddlebag. So they brought it back in 2019. So in 2021, Fendi decided to honor Italian craftsmanship with the Hand in Hand exhibit. This follows with their reverence for made in Italy items, and Silvia and Fendi themselves invited different Italian craftsmen to reimagine and re-envision the Fendi Baguette, honoring their respective crafts, whether they were tanners or furriers or whatever it was, to just reimagine the Fendi Baguette, but in their own way, their own style, and their own specialized craft. And Silvia said this about the exhibit: limited edition isn't just about small quantities. It should be limited because it's made of limited materials, or because it takes time, or because of the person who is able to make it. Yeah, that makes sense. Now let's touch a little bit of Fendi controversy. I'm sure you can guess. Furs. In 2015, Fendi presented their first ever haute couture. They really worked more with ready-to-wear casual, but with Karl, they also did some high fashion haute couture designed by Karl Lagerfeld. And the collection was dubbed Haute Fourrure, which is referencing their furs. And the brand used furs head to toe all the time. There was a lot of criticism, controversy, and also some protests outside the venue from varying different animal rights groups. Karl, who was known for speaking his mind, said the following: "The problem with fur, for me, as people eat meat and wear leather, I don't get the message." And then he also stated, "Fendi is fur, fur is Fendi." So that was Karl's opinion on the matter. So I saw an article that was dated October 9th, 2021 that said that while Fendi has many products in the brand that are fur-free, that does not mean that the pieces are devoid of animal fur. I'm not sure, that's kind of confusing. But basically, I don't think they're going to stop using furs anytime soon. I'm not sure. Currently, Silvia is the only remaining member of the Fendi family to work for Fendi. Like I said, LVMH bought out in 2001, sorry. And her mother and her aunts have all passed away or retired from work, which makes sense. So I'm guessing maybe at some point we'll see a great-granddaughter join Fendi. That would be fabulous. So Silvia is still there, and she is currently working with Kim Jones. He is the current artistic director for Fendi. Kim Jones made his debut for Fendi in Milan in 2021. And when he joined, Silvia actually gave him around 70,000 sketches that Karl had left behind. So we might be seeing some of Karl's pieces that he didn't get a chance to actually make. The show had tons of furs, real furs, lots of fur coats, fur accessories. Some of them were upcycled, some of them were new. It was definitely a choice and a statement to make, especially because many of Fendi's rivals and contemporaries have moved away from furs, like Prada, Miu Miu, Gucci, Chanel. But yeah, I don't know. They're not really moving away from furs anytime soon, I don't think. In 2013, Silvia decided to honor her family and legacy by reintroducing the Celeria collection. This was a handbag collection that her grandmother had originated way back in the day. And so the new bag collection had 8 bags, one for each of her aunts and her mother. And then she named one after her grandmother. She named one after the iconic Baguette and one after the Peekaboo, which was another bag that she designed in like 2008, 2009, which was also a cult status it bag for Fendi. Now, I know I have this rule that I don't like to talk about people who are still alive, but unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know how you want to see this, when I was doing research for Fendi, I got way too invested before I realized that most of the Fendi 5 sisters were still alive and well, and I wish you very well and very long, healthy lives. I don't know why, but I prefer to talk about people who are no longer with us for some reason. So I did most of the research and I was just invested and I was into the story before I realized that Anna is still around. I'm going to tag her, maybe she'll see this. So Pobody's nerfed, like, you know, I did what I could. So yeah, I'm excited to see when the granddaughters joined Fendi, if they do. I mean, Silvia is the last remaining Fendi. Listen, I understand. You work so hard. If I ever built anything that could be sold to LVMH, I would sell in a heartbeat and I would retire to Barbados. I have never hid this from you, so I understand. But I think it could be really great if we could see a 4th generation of Fendi women join the Fendi dynasty, but I'm not sure. But this is the female fashion dynasty Fendi. And one last note, when I did research for this episode, as always, when I do research, I like to Google the family and World War II. There was nothing. They came up squeaky clean. Great. I'm so tired of researching that, trust me. But anyway, this is the female fashion dynasty. Some of the sisters, like I said, had way more information. Some of them were more discreet. I respect that. I'm not going to go through their trash to find out any information. So yeah, this is Fendi. Quite interesting. I honestly had no idea that the Fendi logo was Karl Lagerfeld. I had no idea that it stood for fun furs. I didn't quite understand how steeped in furs this brand is. I didn't know that. So it was very interesting. And I think it's also interesting that, you know, they had 5 daughters, the daughters took over, not their husbands, and how each of them had such a significant role within the company. I think that's really fabulous. So that is today's episode. Remember, the first Friday of each month is a new episode of Beauty History. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Feel free to leave a comment and let me know who you would like to see next in Beauty History, because I do have a list, but sometimes I like a burst of inspiration, and sometimes I just want to know who you would like to see covered in a next upcoming Beauty History episode. If you're not subscribed, please take the time to do so. Make sure you hit your notification bell so you can get notified when I post a new video. And I think that's it for today's video. Leave a comment, let me know what you think of today's episode, of course. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for stopping by. Hope you have a beautiful day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.